There's a BMW E90 with Xdrive, a 2009, and it's having some trouble with the control arm. When I stop, I notice that there's a little bit of looseness to it. It's making some sounds.
Yeah, it doesn't look right.
Maybe you've experienced this problem, and if you are, you're probably ready for a control arm change. So let's switch it out. Alright, safety first, you want to put in your wheel chucks. Make sure that your handbrake is on so you're not rolling anywhere. And also, make sure that if you have manual transmission, that it's in neutral. And if you have an automatic, make sure you put that in park. You'll want to break these lug nuts loose on the wheel. Don't take them off, just break them loose. Next, you'll want to lift the vehicle with the floor jack. Next, you'll want to place jack stands at the jacking points underneath the vehicle. Lower the jack safely onto the jack stand, just to make sure they have contact. Take off the front tire with a 17mm socket. Once you've taken the tire off, you can place it behind the jack stand for extra safety. Alright, so let's get a look at this lower control arm here. Going for a closer look. Okay. This is what we're going to be replacing. So this lower control arm, and it's held in by this 24mm nut on the bottom, and at the top are two 18mm, an 18mm bolt and a nut, and we got to counter hold the nut so we can get the bolt out of there. Now to access this, we're going to need to take off this panel. That'll make things a little easier. Alright, to get better access to this control arm, we loosened up this piece of plastic and removed this dust shield. Those were held on just by 8mm and 10mm bolts. So, easy enough to move out of the way. Okay, let's see. Okay, next, we got to take off this 24mm bolt. It's going to be kind of a pain, so I would use a pretty long wrench or a breaker bar if you got one. Alright, now we need to separate the spindle from the ball joint up here. And we don't want to be destructive about this. Unless you intend to replace the ball joint, I do highly recommend going to AutoZone and renting a ball joint separator so you don't have to replace this thing again unless you necessarily have to replace the ball joint. So that is a pain in the ass to take out, let me tell you. Alright, this is the tool that you need. I got this from AutoZone. It's a ball joint separator. It's like around 34, 35 bucks. And just rented it. As soon as you return it, you get your money back. So definitely use this. I'd avoid using a pickle fork or anything else unless you want to replace the ball joint. In order to separate the spindle from the ball joint, it looks like I'm going to have to take the heat shield off. And to get that off, I need to take the rotor off. In order to take off the rotor, you got to take off the brake pad wear sensor. You just pull that one out, pretty easy, and separate it from here. If this clip is broken off, you probably want to wire tie that. This thing keeps your brake wear sensor safe. Then you're going to want to take off these dust cap covers, and there are two 16mm bolts in here that have to come out as well. Don't let this rotor drop. If it pulls on the brake lines and breaks that, you're gonna have a bad time, okay? Okay. Inside the dust cap cover is a 7mm Allen key. With all the bolts loose, remove the caliper. Once you have the caliper off, make sure that you place it someplace safe. In this case, I'm placing it on a bucket. Alright, next you're going to want to take out this T40 bolt on the rotor. Next we have to take off the brake shield, and this is going to be 4 10mm nuts. Okay, so we found out our ball joint press wasn't wide enough to fit between the swivel and the ball joint. So now we're just going to cut it back a little bit, but that means that we're buying this from AutoZone. 35 bucks, drop in the bucket. But this will get your spindle off safely from the ball joint without destroying the ball joint. So just cut it back a little bit with a grinder. Alright, so we've ground this ball joint press down to size a little bit, just widened it up so it can now fit nicely in here without hurting the ball joint. Please work. Please work. Please work. Sit! Free! Okay, now we're going to remove the part of the control arm that's attached to the subframe. Just use an 18mm wrench to counter hold your 18mm socket on the other end, and we're going to remove the bolt on this side. We got this piece loose, but do be careful because it will fall off the spindle, and if you're working down low it could hit you. This thing's pretty heavy, so just be careful. So now that we have the nut off this bolt, we need to punch this thing out. You might have to wiggle the arm a little bit, but just pull that bolt all the way out. Don't lose it if you need to reuse it. Alright, that bolt is out and the control arm is loose. This bolt is pretty rusty and we are going to reuse it, so I'm going to have to hit that with a wire wheel and clean it up. That bolt looks nice and clean now. Okay. I want to show you the difference between a good control arm and a bad control arm, alright? So, this is the new control arm here, and this is the old one. Now, the new one, let me stick this bolt in here. When you wiggle it around, that bushing's not going anywhere, it's really firm. On this old one, when I move the bolt, the bushing moves with it, and that is usually the symptom that you have a bad control arm. Okay, first things first, we're going to want to get this control arm back up inside here and put the bolt through it and just snug it up, but don't tighten it. You want to tighten this part at ride height, so just remember, wait to tighten this all the way until you are down on the ground with the wheel, or you can just jack up from the hub at 14 inches. We'll go over that later. Okay, now that we got the bolt and nut in on that side, we need to put the spindle back on the ball joint, and this thing moves around. Just kind of wiggle it into place. It should go right in, just like that. Okay, and let's get the 24mm nut on there and snug it up. All right, in order to tighten this nut up, you'll want to tighten this to 60 Newton meters. But in order to do that, you're going to have to counter hold the ball joint with a T40 bit in the bottom. All right, we tighten this up to 60 Newton meters. And now we're just going to put the brake back together. Starting again with the brake shield, then put the rotor back on, then put the caliper back on. All right, so we brought the wheel to ride height, which is from the center of the hub to the fender, 14 inches. And again, being safe, we have jacks in place, tires behind, just in case anything happens. But now we can snug this up to about 100 Newton meters, plus a 90-degree turn. There it is. I get a couple good clicks in for extra measure, and then it says 90 degrees. So 1, 2. I'll do like a little bit more, just can't be too safe.
Snap.
Oh god. That's all snugged in. Okay, and now put the tire back on. Alright, the wheel is back on, the control arm is in. And that's how it's done, guys. Just make sure your lug nuts are nice and snug. And then after that, you'll just have to take the car for an alignment. But thanks for watching the video. I hope you found this helpful.